Thank you, David, and thank you for those very kind and generous words. I'd also particularly like to begin by thanking Dr. Karan Singh and Rajdeep Sardesai for being here today to join me in a conversation about this book. Dr. Karan Singh is someone who I have admired greatly. He was a cabinet minister when I was a student, and so I've had the quite incongruous pleasure of chairing the External Affairs Committee of Parliament with him as my senior member, and feeling particularly humbled by the opportunity to work so closely with him. But one of the reasons I admire him, apart from his many years in Parliament and in public life, has been his extraordinary command of the Hindu scriptures, ancient texts, and of course the lucidity with which he has been able to explain and describe them. I have read all of my Hindu texts in English, but Dr. Karan Singh, who has a PhD in the subject and can rattle off Sanskrit phrases with great comfort, is genuinely the authority on what I have taken the liberty of writing about today. So I'm particularly pleased that he has agreed to engage in dialogue on these issues that he knows so much more about and for so much longer than I do. I might add that amongst other things that I'm delighted by, he and I share a birthday, a few years apart, but it shows that there is a sort of like-mindedness there that I can celebrate. Rajdeep and I share a school. I went to Campion in Bombay, and several years later, his grey hairs notwithstanding, he followed. He has written some marvelous books, as well as, of course, entered our living rooms daily on the television screen, and he and I have already had a very interesting dialogue on India Today television. In fact, the very first one on this book, which I would commend to you all on YouTube if you don't hear or see enough of him this evening. Thank you, Rajdeep, as well. Thank you, Dr. Karan Singh. Now, my title says, why am I a Hindu? And the obvious answer to this question, of course, is that because I was born one. Most people have little choice about the faith in which they've grown up. It was selected for them at birth by the accident of geography, their parents' cultural moorings, and the overwhelming majority of Hindus in the world are probably born Hindu. A small handful may have found other ways of converting, but for most, and certainly for myself, I was born a Hindu, I grew up as one, I've considered myself one all my life. But what does being a Hindu mean? Many of us began having to interrogate ourselves in the late 1980s, when the world media first began to speak of something called Hindu fundamentalism. Now, this was odd because we knew Hinduism as a faith without fundamentals. No founder or prophet, no organized church, no compulsory beliefs or rites of worship, no uniform conception of the good life, no single sacred book. The name Hindu is itself something less and more than a set of theological beliefs. In many languages, French and Persian amongst them, the word for Indian is Hindu. Originally, Hindu simply meant the people beyond the river Sindhu or Indus. But the Indus, of course, is now in Islamic Pakistan, and to make matters worse, the word Hindu didn't exist in any Indian language until its use by foreigners gave Indians a term for self-definition. So Hindus call themselves by a label that they didn't invent themselves in any of their own languages, but started using when others refer to them by that word. Of course, there are Hindus who prefer other terms altogether, Sanatan Dharma being a favorite. But essentially, it was a faith that foreigners applied to the indigenous religious practices of India, and these were very, very wide-ranging practices. But none of them constitutes an obligatory credo for a Hindu. There are none. We have no compulsory dogmas, no binding requirements, not even a belief in God. I grew up in a Hindu household. Our home always had a prayer room where paintings and portraits of assorted divinities jostled for shelf and wall space with fading photographs of departed ancestors, all stained by ash scattered from the incense, the agarbattis burned daily by my devout parents. And I'm very proud my mother is sitting right here in the front row as I speak. I've written before of how my earliest experiences of piety came from watching my father at prayer. Every morning after his bath, my father would stand in front of the prayer room, wrapped in his towel, his wet hair still uncombed, chanting his Sanskrit mantras. But he never obliged me to join him. He exemplified the Hindu idea that religion is an intensely personal matter, that prayer is between you and whatever image of your maker you choose to worship. In the Hindu way, I was to find my own truth. I think I have. I am a believer, despite a brief period of schoolboy atheism of the kind that comes with the discovery of rationality and goes with an acknowledgement of its limitations. And I'm happy to describe myself as a believing Hindu, not just because it's a faith into which I was born, but for a string of other reasons I've talked about in the book, even though, of course, faith requires no reason. There's a cultural reason, the sense of Hinduism as a faith that sprang from the soil of my own country, knit together, as the Harvard scholar Diana Egg said, by countless tracts of pilgrimage, notably the travels of Adi Shankara, who started off from my home state of Kerala, went all the way to Kashmir in the north, to Gujarat in the west, to Assam in the east. The whole cultural matrix which anchors Hinduism in many ways to this land is one that I'm very happy to claim allegiance to, even though, of course, there are Hindus who are no longer Indian and many Hindus for whom this is not particularly important. Perhaps a more important reason, as I said, faith requires no reason, is its cultural fit. That is, that I'm more comfortable intellectually with the tenets of Hinduism than I would be with those of the other faiths of which I know. I've long thought of myself as a liberal, not merely in the political sense of the term or even in relation to principles of economics, but as an attitude to life. That is, to accept people as one finds them, not to judge them, to allow them to be and become whatever they choose, to encourage them to do whatever they like and say whatever they want to, so long as they do not harm others. That is my natural instinct. Rigid and censorious beliefs have never appealed to my temperament. In matters of religion, too, I found that my liberal instincts were reinforced by the faith in which I was brought up. Hinduism is in many ways predicated on the idea that the eternal wisdom of the ages cannot be confined to a single holy book. We have many sacred books. We can delve into each to find our own truth or truths. And so as a Hindu, I can claim adherence to a religion without an established church or priestly papacy, a religion as rituals and customs I'm free to reject, a religion that does not oblige me to demonstrate my faith by any visible sign, by subsuming my identity in any collectivity, not even by a specific day or time or frequency of worship. There is no Hindu Pope, there's no Hindu Vatican, no Hindu Catechism, not even a Hindu Sunday. So it's a faith that offers a veritable smorgasbord of options to the worshipper of divinities, divinities you can adore or pray to, rituals to observe or not, customs and practices to honor or not, fast to keep or not. It's entirely up to you. And so it's a creed that is free of the restrictive dogmas of Holy Writ, one that refuses to be shackled to the limitations of a single volume of sacred revelation. And I appreciate the fact that Hinduism preaches no false certitudes. Its capacity to express wonder at creation and simultaneously skepticism about the omniscience of the Creator are perhaps unique to Hinduism. Both these traits are captured beautifully in this verse from the 3,500-year-old Rig Veda, the Nasadiya Sukta, the creation hymn. Those last lines go, who knows whence this creation had its origin? He, whether he fashioned it or whether he did not. He who surveys it all from the highest heavens, he knows. Or maybe even he does not know. Maybe even he does not know. I love a faith that raises such a fundamental question about no less a supreme being than the creator of the universe himself. Maybe he does not know indeed. Who are we mere mortals to claim a knowledge of that which even he cannot be certain? And while I'm paradoxically listing my reasons for a faith beyond reasoning, beyond understanding, let me cite the fundamental point. Above all, as a Hindu, I belong to the only major religion in the world that does not claim to be the only true religion. I find it immensely congenial to be able to face my fellow human beings of other faiths without being burdened by the conviction that I am embarked upon a true path that they have somehow missed. Hinduism asserts that all ways of belief are equally valid, and Hindus readily venerate the saints and the sacred objects of other faiths. I'm proud that I can honor the sanctity of other faiths without feeling that I'm betraying my own. Hinduism is a timeless faith, populated by ideas at once ancient and modern, hosting texts, philosophies, belief systems, and schools of thought that do not necessarily all agree with each other. Hindu thought is like a vast library in which no book ever goes out of print, even if the religious ideas that a specific volume contains have not been read or enunciated or followed in centuries. The book remains available to be dipped into, to be revised and reprinted with new annotations or commentaries whenever a reader feels like it. In many cases, the thoughts it contains may have been modified by or adapted to other ideas that may have arisen in response. In most, it's simply there to be referred to, used, or ignored as Hindus see fit. In fact, a friend of mine in New York, Shashi Tharoor, suggested to me that the correct analogy is that Hinduism is like an open source operating system on top of which others can build apps to be deployed in the receptive hardware of human brains. Now, this Hinduism, as I said, that I've written about is partly from the ancient texts in good translations, partly from my own observation of my father and other devout Hindus, partly from growing up looking at Hinduism, living as a Hindu, and partly as well from the teachings of our great preceptors, sages, and Mahatmas. But some things are also anecdotal in the book. My father, for example, might talk about a few times, devout Hindu, prayed faithfully, regularly went on pilgrimages to all the major temples and religious sites of our land. In fact, when a fire engulfed the Guruvayur temple in Kerala in the 1960s, he led a fundraising drive in Bombay that saw much of his meager savings diverted to rebuilding that shrine. And yet, when a Catholic friend who made a trip to the Vatican presented him with an amulet of the Virgin Mary that had personally been blessed by the Pope, or so he said, my father accepted it with reverence and carried it around with him for years. That is Hinduism that most Hindus know, a faith that accords respect and even reverence to the sanctified beliefs of others. This inclination to revere the divine, whatever its source, is a notable Hindu trait. In his historic speech at Chicago's World Parliament of Religions in 1893, Swami Vivekananda, whom I quote a great deal in the book, very memorably said that Hinduism, he says, I am proud to belong to a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance. We believe not only in universal toleration, but we accept all religions as true. And he went on to quote a hymn, the Shiva Mahimna Stotram, which he remembered from his formative years. And he quoted, as the different streams having their sources in different places, all mingle their water in the sea, O Lord, so the different paths that men take through different tendencies, various though they appear, crooked or straight, all lead to thee. This is the Vivekananda belief, and I think it's a profoundly important idea, central to the philosophy of Hinduism that Vivekananda was preaching. Because tolerance, a wonderful emotion, it's a great quality, but it is slightly patronizing, right? It basically says, I have the truth, you are in error, but I will magnanimously indulge you in the right to be wrong. But acceptance says, I believe I have the truth, you believe you have the truth, I will respect your truth. Please respect my truth. It seems to me a perfect prescription for getting along with people of other faiths and in a country like ours for our own democracy. I challenge the world to find, Vivekananda proudly declared in another speech in Chicago, throughout the whole system of Sanskrit philosophy, any such expression as that the Hindu alone will be saved and not others. Says Vyasa, we find perfect men even beyond the pale of our caste and creed. So that's why Hindus worship the divine in multiple forms, the 333 million gods of legend, and there are various other numbers, even here we are flexible, are in fact merely a reflection of the infinite aspects of divinity. While Other faiths tend to personify the idea of God, seeing him in anthropomorphic terms as a man-like being. The Hindu idea of God is both simpler and more complicated. God to the Hindu is everywhere, a presence and an absence, within us and outside us. God transcends both time and space. God has no beginning and no end, but equally has no shape and no form. God can therefore be imagined in a myriad ways and in all conceivable shapes and forms, since there is nowhere that God is not and nowhere that God cannot be. Now, this was just to give you a flavor of what I've said about Hinduism in the book. There's much more along these lines, explicating my understanding of Hinduism in some detail, with a mixture of personal anecdotes and extracts from the ancient texts. But I also cite the great teachers. I've quoted Vivekananda in speaking to you today, but the various others, Adi Shankara, Mahatma Gandhi himself. And then in the next section, I talk about Hindutva theory. And I do so by quoting again extensively from the writings of Savarkar, who invented the term Hindutva, Golwalkar, who was perhaps its most virulent exponent, and Deen Dayal Upadhyay, who is now being extolled by the present government as its ideologue, as the person whom they want every ministry to study the thoughts of. And this is a very interesting philosophy, surprisingly quite at variance with the faith of Hinduism that I've tried briefly to describe to you at much greater length in the book, because it says, for example, Savarkar goes on to say he's not even particularly devout himself. He sees Hindutva as being much more than religion, because he says Hindutva embodies the idea of culture and race, very much ideas of the 1920s, you might say, around the world at that time, much more than the idea of religion. But he says that in this country, the country belongs, he says, to those for whom this country is their motherland, the place they were born, their fatherland, the homeland of their ancestors, and their holy land, the land of their sacred faith, which of course excludes, by definition, Muslims and Christians right away, since their holy land is outside the subcontinent. The exponents of this philosophy of Hindutva, which I hope I've been very fair to in the book, I mean, I've really summarized it in some detail, starting off from this premise, end up rejecting the very basis of Indian nationhood that we've all grown up with. So Golwalkar and Upadhyay are fundamentally scathing about the Constitution, for example. Not just because, as they both say, it's a westernized document full of borrowed foreign ideas written by Anglophile lawyers in the wrong language, all of which they're not terribly happy about, but because of something more profound in their view. They say the fundamental flaw with our Constitution is that it rests on the wrong premise about what is a nation. They say the idea of the Constitution is that a nation is a territory called India and all the people living on it. But, they argue, a nation is not a territory, it is a people, and the people have to be the Hindu people. And with a fervent plea to take back Hinduism, for those who, like Dr. Karan Singh and myself, see other qualities in the faith than the Hindutva brigades like to emphasize. The qualities that I've described to you at such length in the beginning of my remarks. In the 21st century, I would argue, and in his own way, in different language, Dr. Karan Singh has made the same argument elsewhere, Hinduism has many of the attributes of a universal religion, the right one for the 21st century. A religion that is both personal and individualistic, that privileges the individual and does not subordinate one to a collectivity, a religion that grants and respects complete freedom to the believer to find his or her own answers to the true meaning of life, a religion that offers a wide range of choice in religious practice, even in regard to the nature and form of the formless God, a religion that places great emphasis on one's mind and one's capacity for reflection, intellectual inquiry, and self-study, because the Hindu is expected to look for the truth within himself, a religion that distances itself from dogma and holy writ, that is minimally prescriptive and yet offers an abundance of options, spiritual and philosophical texts, and social and cultural practices to choose from. In a world of today where resistance to authority is growing, Hinduism imposes no authorities. In a world of networked individuals, Hinduism proposes no institutional hierarchies. In a world of open source information sharing, Hinduism accepts all parts as equally valid. In a world of rapid transformations and accelerating change, Hinduism is adaptable and flexible. So I go back to that Wikipedia-like authorship of the faith, that open source app invention theory of the faith, and I say, I give you, ladies and gentlemen, a faith for the 21st century that some in our country are trying to drag back to the 19th. I hope you'll enjoy the book and the discussion. Thank you very much.